Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 20. Today we're going to talk about site design issues. For today, you had to read chapters 1 through 7 of Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. It's a really good book. The tagline is a common sense approach to web and mobile usability. So we're going to be focusing on what can we do to our websites to make it the most usable that it can be for the users, to make them keep coming back, and help them to find what they're looking for when they visit your sites. So we've spent this whole semester learning how to code, and so now we're going to go into designing our websites in a way that make people want to use it. Krug's first law of usability is don't make me think. What does this mean? So if you ask the question, what's the most important thing you should do if you want to make sure that your site is easy to use, the answer is this: don't make me think. Which basically is saying that if a user goes to your site, they shouldn't have to expend a lot of brain power trying to figure out what site they're on, or where they can find what they need to do, and how they can accomplish their tasks. So this should be a driving factor when you're making all of your design decisions. You can do a number of things to decrease this cognitive load, like avoiding cute and clever naming if it's not obvious. I think the book uses the example where there's three buttons, and one says jobs, one says employment opportunities, and then one says Joborama. Joborama doesn't necessarily give you a good idea of what that button is going to do. Whereas if you see a button that says jobs, you are going to immediately know that that's what you need to click on in order to find the careers of a website. So that kind of naming can go a long way in helping users to find what they need to do. Another one is to make things that are clickable look clickable. So links should not look like the text surrounding it. Buttons should normally have a background color that differentiates them from just being regular text. And all this does is it decreases that cognitive workload. So if you remember back to our design discussion, we talked about design axioms. And an axiom is a way of doing things that is an established convention. It's a rule for how to do something, which is different from a design pattern, which is just a specific way of doing something, but isn't necessarily the best. So you want to stick to using those axioms wherever is possible. Some questions that you do not want a user to be asking when they get to your site is, where am I? You want them to know exactly what site they're on. Where should I begin? And why did they do it this way? These are all questions that are making the user think about using your website. And you want to avoid this, because if a user goes to your site and doesn't know how to use it, or they think the way that you did something is confusing, they're going to go somewhere else. There's a lot of competition, and they'll find a better place to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So how do we really use the web? So when we're designing, a lot of times we have lots of content, and we have our content from left to right, and we expect the user to come in and start there and read through everything that we've written. And spoiler alert, this is not how it works. We don't read pages, we scan them. Usually when you come to a site, you're on a mission. You're trying to accomplish a specific task. Like, say you're going to a site to apply for a job. You're not going to read the entire website if you're just trying to do that one specific task. Another reason we scan is we don't need everything on the page. We're there to do oftentimes one thing. And we're good at scanning. We read newspapers that way. Sometimes we read books that way. We're good at scanning. We're good at picking up on keywords. And it helps us accomplish our goals a lot faster. Fact of life number 2, we don't make optimal choices, we satisfice. And this just means that we don't always choose the best option. We choose one that looks good enough. So, for example, if you're looking at a bunch of links, and you might click the links, the ones that you think are closest to what you're trying to do, not necessarily putting a lot of brain power into whether it actually is. And some of the reasons we do this is we're in a hurry, and sometimes it's faster to just click until we find something. And there's not a big penalty for clicking something incorrectly, at least a lot of the times. You can always go back. The back button is the most used button on the web for good reason. Fact of life number 3 is we don't spend a lot of time actually figuring out how things work. We just muddle through them. How often do you read the entire manual or the entire directions when you get a new appliance? I know I don't. Or if you're trying to learn a new technology, you're probably not going to sit and read hundreds of pages of how it works. You might try to do some stuff, and if it doesn't work, maybe you'll look up some documentation. And why do we do this? We don't really need to know how it works all the time. And often once we figure out how something does work, we don't really change how we approach it. So if you know that you can find the careers page of a website by going to the search bar and searching for it, and that works for you, you're probably going to do that every time. You're not going to go look for it in another place next time you visit the site. So we're going to talk in a little bit about a concept called usability study, where you have an application that you've pretty much completed an initial passive development on, and you have other people who have never seen it try to use it. And it's one of the most maddening things that you can do, because you'll watch them working on their site and you just want to yell at them and tell them how to do that. So say back to our jobs example, you want them to click on this jobs link and they're just clicking everything around it and they can't find it. But that's why we do these usability studies, is so that we can figure out these little issues that we might not necessarily find on our own. So what do? We design for how people function, not how we think they should. So we design for scanning, since we know that's how people are going to read our sites. A good way we can do this, I mentioned design axioms and conventions. So where things go is a convention. The header normally goes at the top, footer normally goes at the bottom. How things work: if you see a link, it's usually like some kind of blue text or underlined, and it's different from the text around it, you know that that's going to take you to a new page. And you can also have conventions for how things look. So a shopping cart on Amazon lets you go look at all of the items that you're planning to buy. And using these conventions just makes it easier. It's back to that first law of usability, is keeping the user from having to think too much. If you're going to replace a convention, it needs to be just as clear as what the convention would have been without it. And then we also want to create effective visual hierarchies. Some traits of visual hierarchies is the more important something is, the more prominent it is. Secondly, things that are related logically are related visually. So think about the list items that would appear in a navigation. They're all next to each other and they're all saying we are part of the navigation. And then things are nested on a page to show what's a part of what. So maybe you have a heading and then you have a subtitle and then an image. Those might be nested in that section to let you know that they're all related. And then for text formatting, a few tricks to support scanning is using headings to break up the content, which also lets the user know if they can skip reading that section or if they need it in order to accomplish their goal. You want to keep things short. Use bulleted lists for optimal readability. So even if in this slide I have everything as a bulleted list, if this was all just a block of content, your initial reaction might be that you don't want to read that big block of text. So Krug's second law of usability states it doesn't matter how many times you have to click, as long as each click is a mindless, unambiguous choice. And what he's saying here is that you don't want to have the user have to think about where they're clicking. You don't want them to have to say, okay, is this link going to go to the contact section or is it going to go to registration section? You don't want them to have to use their brains too much, because we're lazy, and if we have to use our brain too much, we'll probably go to a different site. Krug's third law of usability states that you should get rid of half of the words on a page and then get rid of half of what's left. So no one is going to read everything that you put on your website. So if it's not necessary, if it's not contributing value to what you're trying to accomplish, then just take it out. Krug mentions being ruthless with it. I mean, if you write, say you have an About Me section and you write 4 paragraphs talking about how great you are and all the stuff that you've done, he's saying cut it in half and then cut it in half again, because that's about what people are going to read. And that's a really good rule to follow when writing content. Some of the reasons for doing this is that it'll reduce noise and clutter on your site. It'll make the stuff that actually is useful more prominent. And then again, it makes your pages shorter, which is nice, especially if you're on a mobile device and there's just a ton of content and you're just scrolling and scrolling. That can get really annoying, and it also makes things harder to find. Chapter 6 of the book talked a lot about navigation. This is one of the most important components of your site. If someone goes to, say they come to a photography website and they want to find your pictures and they can't find where your pictures are, they're probably not going to stay there very long. People aren't going to use your site if they can't find their way around it. And when you visit a site, you're usually trying to find something, and you can get frustrated really quickly if you can't. So I want to pose the question, when you go to a website like, say, Amazon, do you go straight to the search box or do you browse around? There are two kind of people here. There are search dominant people, and these are people like me, I do this, who ignore the entire site and they go to the search bar and they just search for what they want. They don't really look at anything else on the site. They know exactly what they want, and they know that if they search for it, they can find it really quickly. These are search dominant people. And you also can have link dominant people, and these are people who go and they browse first and they read some more of the content and figure out what might lead them to where they're trying to get. And a lot of times they do this by just clicking links. And if they can't find what they want, after a while they'll probably leave. So the two purposes of a navigation are to find what we're looking for and to tell us where we are. These are the two main purposes of navigation, but it also should tell us what's on the site, how to use it, and it gives confidence in the people that build it. Here I have an example. This is Expedient.com. It's a company in Pittsburgh, and I've highlighted 3 major sections of their navigation. So we have the site identity over here. Site identity we've talked about. This is the name of the company or the logo, basically the component on your website that lets you know whose website you're on, what company it is. Sometimes there'll be 2 navigations like this, and if you see something up here, this is usually the utilities. These are important elements of a page that aren't necessarily part of the content hierarchy, and you normally don't want to do more than 4 or 5. This is the primary navigation. These are going to be more of the major features of the website, the top level site hierarchy. Sometimes if, say I were to click on data centers here, this might highlight red, and then that would let you know that that's the major content section that you're on. It's called the You Are Here feature. You can't see that in this example. But those are the 4 major features of the navigation, and these are conventions. These are concepts you want to stick to, because when a user visits your site, they'll know exactly where to look for everything. Persistent navigation, also called global navigation. This is just the main navigation that appears. So if you're clicking through all of your pages, you might see the About Me section, the contact page, all that stuff, all at the top. And this is a good way for the user to know exactly where they are at all times. You want to have that site identification there so they know that you're still on your website. You don't always want this though. I mean, for the most part, you should have it, but there are some cases where you don't always want it, like if you're filling out some kind of form, the navigation can be more of a distraction than it is helpful. You still want to have some kind of site identification or a home button, but it should be minimal so that their main purpose on that page is to fill out the form and they can concentrate on doing so. you always want to have a home button or some mechanism that the user can know how to get back to where they started. I think having a home button is a really good practice in addition to having a clickable logo. A lot of the times the site identity or the logo is a link back to the home page. And the reason that a home button is so important is it's like a reset for your website. It lets you get back and restart and start over if you mess everything up or get lost. And finally, you should, if you can, have a search bar. It's a good way to filter content and let a user who is a search dominant person find exactly what they're looking for quickly. Breadcrumbs are a feature. I have a picture here. They show you where you are. They're really good for big websites that have a lot of nested hierarchies. So I have this picture here. This is from newegg.com. It's a site that sells computer hardware and a lot of other stuff. But you can see, say they started out on home, then clicked on software and services, and then clicked on Mac software, and now here there'd be a bunch of content about Mac software. It gives you a good indicator of where you are on the site, so you're a few levels in here, and it also lets you get back to a higher level navigation item if you want. So some conventions are put them at the top, which is where this one is, use this caret in between, and then boldface the last item. And this one does a good job of that. Finally, designing the homepage. The homepage has to do a lot of stuff. It has to tell you what the site is and what it's for via the site identity. It needs to display the site hierarchy. You should have some search capabilities, maybe some content promotions, shortcuts, login, registration. It should also show you where to start. It should let you know exactly what your first thing should be, depending on what task you're trying to accomplish. It should also establish trust. Like if your website looks like shit, no one's going to think you're credible. If it looks not well done, it'll look like you don't have the money to invest in a good website, which makes people not want to trust you a lot. And if you're a web developer and your website looks really bad, then people aren't going to hire you as a web developer. Another issue, I have too many cooks in the kitchen relating to this image over here. Everyone's going to want their content on this page. So if you're working for a team, you have a marketing department, marketing is going to want all of their cool stuff in here, alumni, promotions for event campuses, all this kind of stuff. And this is what all of your marketing people are going to say that they want on a university website versus what people actually go to the site to do, which is usually find your email, academic calendar. That's another thing that I always have to Google because I can never find it on a school website. This is an XKCD comic, but it's very true if you look at our own site too. So to summarize that, you have to be able to pick and choose what is actually important and make sure that's on the homepage. You want to be able to get the big picture across instead of just displaying all the content possible. You can have a tagline. A tagline's that little bit of text that usually goes below or around the site identity. It's short and sweet, gets the point across, clear and informative, lets you know what the site is. Shouldn't necessarily be a motto. It's better to have it as something that explains what the site is. So if someone's there, they know why they're there and what they're trying to do. And it shouldn't be generic. The website or the homepage should also let you clearly know where to start. So if you're trying to search, you should clearly know where to start if you want to search. And if you're trying to browse, you should clearly know where to start if you want to browse. So the homepage has a lot going on, and it has a tendency to get very cluttered, and which can cause you to lose the big picture of the homepage, which is kind of the whole point of it. So we covered a lot of web usability, and a few ways that we can make our websites as usable as possible. So hopefully going forward, you can take all the skills that you've learned, HTML and CSS, and apply these usability principles when designing your pages. So let me know if you have any questions.